Hello, Africa. Welcome to the Green Energy Africa podcast. And today we're joined by Mr. Peter Vivian-Neal, who will shortly introduce himself. We're going to talk about maybe who he is. We'll talk about the company, but we'll also broadly talk about the state of the energy within and across the continent. Mr. Vivian-Neal, good day. Welcome to Green Energy Africa. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for having me on your very interesting show. As you say, I'm Peter Vivian-Neal. I've been living in Zambia since the year 2000. I came here originally in the mining industry as a mining exploration company leader, and I have been working on geothermal for the last 10 years. And we are now reached the stage that we are developing we are doing a feasibility study to develop geothermal to produce power in Zambia, which will be the first in Southern Africa.
All right, I'm looking forward to exploring that conversation a bit, so I'm glad that you are on. Let's talk a bit about maybe your company, then we'll go back to sort of the geothermal exploration and all of that. Tell us a bit about that, please.
Yes, certainly. The company is Zambian registered. Owned by a number of individuals that had largely worked with me previously in the copper exploration industry. We set ourselves up in 2010 solely to focus on geothermal in Southern Africa, which was a big move at the time, given that geothermal was in its infancy, except for in Kenya. And we've kept at it through the last 10 years, looking at across the country and indeed across the region, including South Africa, and then focused for the last 7 or 8 years in Southern Province, actually very close to the home of our newly elected president as of today. And we are, having gone from a standing start with really no background information, have arrived at the point that we're doing a feasibility on a commercial geothermal power generating plant. We have a relatively small number of employees, all Zambians, whom we've tried to upskill and get trained and get experience as we go through each phase. And we subcontract most of the very technical work, such as drilling, but building up the skills base here.
I suppose my next question was exactly on that. The skills that one requires as a geothermal practitioner, where do you find people with that understanding, particularly in Zambia specifically, but broadly speaking across the African continent? What skills do you need? What's the ease or difficulty with which you go about doing exactly that?
So in the early stages, geothermal is very similar to mineral or gas exploration. You rely on geologists that understand the geology. You rely on drillers that have drilled in the gas fields, such as in South Africa, in Virginia. And you accept that you are going to have to learn on the job, because there are no skills in Southern Africa to start with. We've gone a long way by using, for want of a better word, conventional skills from the mining industry, such as geophysics and drilling. And as we have gone further down the road, we've learnt and brought in expertise to teach our team on the ground as we do the work.
When we talk about sustainable sources of energy, we speak about wind generated energy, solar power, then we talk about geothermal energy. Can you help me understand what makes geothermal energy sustainable? What's the difference between that, for instance, and your fossil fuel type energy?
Okay, so first of all, fossil fuels are exactly that. You take them out of the ground, you burn them, they are not replaced. Geothermal energy is both renewable and often referred to as sustainable, because unlike the first two you mentioned, it is able to produce baseload power. So it's on demand, it is not affected by the environment or things beyond the control of the operator. You can run a geothermal power plant 98% of the time at nameplate capacity. And that is a really key aspect in your energy mix, that you can totally rely on it being there. A modern geothermal power plant probably needs 2 days a year of maintenance. The concept is that the planet is hot. If it wasn't hot, we couldn't live on it, and its heat comes from the original formation of the planet and the decay of the radioactive elements, which is exothermic, produces heat. And that heat is brought to surface either as steam, of water flash to steam, or as very hot water. And the energy, the thermal energy, is taken from the water, and then that water is returned and ultimately reheats and comes back again. So you're not depleting anything apart from the thermal energy, which is self-replicating and will do so for beyond human time.
Right. So for sometimes there is a misconception that sustainable energy sources do not generate environmental waste. I think by definition, they do tend to be a lot more friendly to the environment, but I'm pretty sure there are some waste that you need to deal with, even when you're producing geothermal energy. Can you maybe just talk a bit about that? Do you generate waste, and how do you treat that?
In a straight answer, one-word answer, no, there is no waste, because everything is contained within the system and everything is re-injected back into the geothermal system where it came from. There is short-term waste and there's long-term waste. As you're aware, there's a lot of arguments about whether solar panels are actually carbon neutral during their life and how do you get rid of them at the end. You certainly can't put them out for the municipal collection. They have to be specially processed. A geothermal plant uses pretty standard industry components of steel, which ultimately can be recycled. There are no inert gases or valuable rare earths within the system as there are in solar plants. So I think the waste, both in terms of the plant construction and indeed production, is minimal. It's not like, for instance, a wind farm which needs new blades every few years. The maintenance, plants will typically do 20 to 25 years without any significant maintenance beyond routine, just like servicing your car. So I think that the word sustainable truly applies to geothermal.
All right, and in terms of the energy mix, whether it's in Zambia or within the SADC region, what are you hoping for in terms of maybe taking a share of that the energy requirements that are there?
So in Zambia, which is relatively unique, we still use some 90% of large scale, 90% of our electrical generation comes from large scale hydro. 70% of our primary energy comes from charcoal, just to put that into this context. But in terms of electricity, some 90% comes from large scale geothermal, hydro. And as everyone is aware in SADC, the very small climate increase in temperature that we so far expected has had a huge impact on water levels within the dams, to the point that Zambia actually had to severely ration power last year. And we therefore think that geothermal has an important role in the energy mix to provide baseload power, particularly in countries which have an industrial base, so South Africa, but most particularly Zambia, with 70% of all power being used by the mines. And I see that geothermal and our company will provide a relatively small addition to that energy mix, but nonetheless it's baseload and therefore dispatchable, which puts it in the same category as large-scale hydro, gas and coal, but it is renewable.
Okay, and in terms of maybe investments, are you getting any support from maybe the Zambian government? If I were to start a geothermal company anywhere, is it easy to get funding for sort of a geothermal project, generally speaking?
I think the answer, with hindsight, is it's still a challenge. I think in the countries where geothermal has really taken off, such as Kenya, North America, which has now been doing it for a while, places like Turkey, it is becoming easier. It is recognized as mainstream. But here, if you try to do it in South Africa or anywhere in SADC, it's still new and it still raises questions, certainly during the exploration, the discovery stage. Once you get to the development of the surface equipment to generate the power, I think it would appear to become much easier.
There are still maybe companies that believe or view Africa as a difficult place to do business. You say you've been in Zambia for, I think you said about 10 years, so you're obviously quite comfortable in Lusaka. What's your experience in terms of ease of doing business within the continent? Maybe just to speak to those companies that are maybe still thinking about coming to the continent to either invest or operate from within. What's your view on that? Is it hard?
I've worked across Africa in my lifetime. I think I've got to 28 or 29 countries, African countries. And I would say that working in SADC is the easiest. You know pretty much the rule of law is applied. The rule of law is clear and supports private enterprise here. You know that if you land a container in Durban or Dar es Salaam, it will be in Lusaka within 15 days. You know what it's going to cost to get it. And I cannot say the same for anywhere north of us. And I think it's easy for people outside Africa to see it as one continent, but inside we all see it, and I'm sure you do, as very different places. West Africa is a very long way from here, and it operates on a very different level of business ethics. And I think that from a perspective of operating in Zambia, this has been the easiest part of Africa I've had to work from a commercial business sense, integrating with the government.
That's very encouraging.
Hopefully I'm not proved wrong.
No, I'm pretty sure we're still okay. And I appreciate that perspective. And I particularly like you making a distinction between first the different regions within Africa, whether that's West Africa, the SADC region, or the North Africa. So we're not just one big uniform landmass, but there are differences. So I really do like that perspective. How are you looking? If you can maybe talk about your medium to long-term goals as a company, where are you going?
Okay, so right now we are doing a feasibility study on 7 megawatts of geothermal power, electrical power. That may not seem a lot to the big coal stations and the nuclear power plant in South Africa, but you've got to start somewhere. And we believe it's better to start with what we've got in hand rather than sitting it out and waiting for the big number to come up. So we hope that that plant will start the process. We should have finished the regulatory hurdles by about Easter of next year, and hope to have at least the civil works being done by late 2022, with the plant potentially being commissioned in early 23. Meanwhile, we will continue to explore. We have a lot more geothermal system that has yet to be drilled, so we would expect to raise both the temperature and the volume of the reservoirs in that time. And so if you looked at 5 years, I would see us possibly heading towards 20 megawatts, and maybe 8 to 10 years, 50 megawatts. But at the same time, also, it's very important that I think we use the thermal energy to support the community for socioeconomic uplift. And so our plan is that we use the energy that's not used in the power plant for agro-processing, fish farming, bean processing or agro-processing, dairy processing, etc. And that too is sort of going hand in hand with what we're doing. And then thirdly, we aim to capture the commercially valuable gases that are associated with geothermal. That's not the same as releasing them into the environment. That's making a specific circuit in order to capture them and to commercialize their value.
All right, I was particularly interested on your website. You do go into some depth around the contribution that you either are or intend to make towards the communities. So I'm glad that you've spoken or touched on that. Why does it matter to you and your company to focus on the community aspect as well?
I think it's very important that any business recognizes the community in which it is based. And for too long, the extractive industries have ridden roughshod over local community feelings and sentiments, and there are many, many examples around the world of that. And I think that renewable energy comes with a sort of tag that you're also socially responsible. And for us, I see it as a win-win situation. If we get the local community engaged with what we're going to do, that is actually on the way to winning for everybody. And I think it is relatively straightforward. When we work, I make sure that before each season, any community that looks on to where we're working has at least working water wells, and therefore are not having to use buckets over a great distance. And we make sure that their wells, etc., work, and we do provide sort of other little maintenance services for them. As we go forward, I want to see a mini grid. Okay, we are commercial. There's no getting away from that. But I would expect that we will install a mini grid for the immediate communities around us. Obviously, that power will have to be subsidized given the state of the economy there, and that our efforts will create economic activity, which will lead to sustainable jobs, which will lead to greater use of our electricity as they are able to buy fridges and televisions. So it's not entirely selfish, but I do see that the community will benefit, and that by the community benefiting, we will also benefit. And a classic would be outgrower schemes for crops.
All right, I really like that. And it's been really good to observe companies becoming more conscious that the community is not something that's over there and we here doing business, but it's actually as integrated, the same way that the environment is integrated to what you do, the community is just as integrated. And I think for me personally, the success of businesses is so intertwined with how we uplift our neighboring or host communities as we go about generating whatever profits we may be able to generate. So I really do appreciate that, and I hope continue to make such a contribution. But maybe Mr. Vivian-Neal, as we get ready to wrap up, I'm wondering if there are maybe things you want to share with our viewers and listeners, maybe something I did not ask, or anything at all that you want to leave with our viewers and listeners.
Well, that's very kind of you. I think that what we've demonstrated here is determination to help Zambia address its energy policy. We are the private sector, as I said, but I see a strong sense of we're all in this together. Zambia has been through a long period of load shedding, as indeed you do in South Africa, and we see ourselves very much as the first mover in sustainable baseload renewable power. And I hope that we will be able to prove not only that it can work in Zambia, but can work throughout the SADC countries, because you all have geothermal power of one sort or another. And as you've been highlighting just now, that these direct applications really do work for the social community and social uplift. So actually we all go forward together and we make this a community and commercially viable enterprise that helps the country grow, because with power and with stable and usable power comes development. And I think that's fundamental.
And that is the best place to stop today's conversation. I'm pretty sure there'll be many future conversations. So again, from the Green Energy Africa podcast and all our listeners and viewers, we do wish you well as you grow the company. Because for me, the more of these companies focusing on sustainable energy there are on the continent, then we're well on our way to reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. So, Mr. Peter Vivian-Neal, I do thank you for your time, and yeah, all the best in Zambia. It sounds like there's a new sort of political broom that's about to sweep across the nation. So, best wishes.
Thank you very much indeed.